my name is Dr. Maureen Rutherford, and I'm here today to talk to you a little bit about what our lab is doing in the psychology department at IU Northwest and how we want to understand anxiety disorders and their treatments a little bit better. So what is anxiety? So anxiety, you may already have experience with. It's a very normal feeling of concern or worry in response to the events in your life. So perhaps preparing a public talk, or when you forget to pay a bill or submit an assignment, or when your car starts making a funny noise. You might start feeling a little bit of anxiety. When anxiety becomes a problem is when the anxiety becomes prolonged or it's exaggerated in response to the event in one's life, or if the anxiety starts to interfere with one's quality of life. There are also some physiological symptoms that are associated with long-term or chronic anxiety, and that includes racing heartbeat and feeling of impending doom sometimes, and shaking and sweating. So when that anxiety condition becomes, again, interfering with one's daily life, it could be diagnosed as an anxiety disorder. And so there's a whole cluster of anxiety disorders. Anxiety disorders are a problem. Over 1 in 5 individuals are currently experiencing symptoms of an anxiety disorder, and almost 1/3 of individuals will be diagnosed with an anxiety disorder at some point during their life. With regards to treatment of anxiety disorders, there's no one-size-fits-all for anxiety disorders because they present in many different ways. So the treatment really must be individualized for the person. And so options for managing anxiety disorders include kind of traditional therapies or behavioral therapies, as well as pharmacotherapies or a combination of multiple approaches. Our lab is interested in understanding a little bit more about pharmacotherapies because the pharmacotherapies or drugs that are used to treat anxiety disorders aren't perfect. There are oftentimes side effects that are elicited that make an individual not want to take the disorder or to take the treatment in order to manage the disorder. There are also, if an individual needs to take the drug for longer than anticipated, that can also have some long-term effects. And also, one of our major concerns is that between 40 and 60% of individuals may not respond to their first option. So this means that we need additional options beyond the traditional antidepressants or the benzodiazepines that are typically used in the course of drug treatment for anxiety disorders. So, what our lab is mainly focused on is trying to understand a little bit about anxiety and how we can better manage these treatments. So how do we go about doing this? Well, I do want to mention that all of my research is very student-driven. My students bring a lot of really interesting questions. They do all of the data collection and analysis. And so all of the work that I will mention involves my students very heavily. In our lab, we use the Zebrafish model. This is a model that obviously is not a human model. I often get the question, why do we use zebrafish? And so zebrafish are really interesting in that, especially when we're looking at stress responses, they have very, very similar brain and endocrine pathways that are used to manage behavioral and physiological responses to stress. So they're a good model for testing some of these drugs. We can also infer a little bit about their mental status based on how they're behaving. So in the wild, zebrafish are river fish, and when they are experiencing a stressful event like being pursued by a predator, they tend to dive near the bottom of the river, or they hide out in dark spaces like under plants or rocks. So we can kind of model those behaviors in the lab by measuring how deep the zebrafish dive, how long they stay near the bottom of the tank, and whether or not they're spending more time, if they're preferring to spend more time in lightened sides of the tank versus dark sides of the tank. So we can infer how they're feeling based on how they're moving. So they're really great models for testing what we are interested in. And it's important to note that a lot of the anxiety modulating drugs that are currently used to manage anxiety disorders in humans also have very similar effects on behavior. So we see less time spent in the dark side. They're spending more time exploring in the tank rather than hanging out at the bottom. So our lab has been interested in drug repurposing, and this is the idea that we can take drugs that are already FDA approved for other conditions and examine their properties in an animal model to see if they do have any useful anti-anxiety effects. So our lab has investigated certain antidepressants, mood stabilizers, alpha blockers. Another really interesting area of research that has been driven by my students is investigating herbal supplements. So herbal supplements are plant-based compounds that have been used in other cultures throughout the world, sometimes for hundreds or even thousands of years. And we want to know a little bit more about those anti-anxiety properties and the chemical constituents that may be mediating those effects. Some future studies in our lab are going to involve studying the effects of stress and drugs during development. So in early life, around sexual maturation, and see how that stress and drug exposure can influence how the adult animal responds to stress, because it has really important implications for the development of anxiety disorders and other stress-related conditions. So overall, I want you to take home from this that anxiety disorders are common, we need other treatments, and that we can use animal models to understand a little bit more about new and effective options that could potentially be used one day to treat humans. So another really important thing is that our student research is really important and is adding to our growing understanding of anxiety disorders and their treatment. Thank you so much for listening to this, and if you want to learn more about our lab's work, you can always visit rutherfordlab.com. Thank you.